think it is important to note that The Matrix is not, simply and straightforwardly Christian. I think you could probably give it a Buddhist reading, you give it kind of a Gnostic reading, but I think there clearly are Christian overtones and undertones and implications. The minute you mention the Trinity and Zion and Neo and the Chosen One, you're clearly in a Christian thought world. I don't want to suggest, though, that somehow it's exclusively Christian, but I think you can give it that reading rather well. There's a key point in the plot where Morpheus, who's the representative of the liberated humanity, offers this pill to Neo. Take this pill as a sign of your acceptance of what we're offering to you, your willingness to cooperate with us. And he does. And that's what commences the process of his liberation. The church holds out to us sacraments. What are they? Well, they don't make a lot of sense within the ordinary world. They're just these water and oil and bread and wine and these physical signs. But they're imbued, we say, with a kind of invitation from a higher world. Do you accept this offer of a higher vision, though you can't see it, though it's not clear to you, though a lot of suffering will be involved? Are you willing to surrender to the invitation of a higher power? Well, there's baptism, there's the Eucharist, there's confession. I think Neo at times is reluctant, and Neo doesn't fully understand the implications of what's going on. I think he balks and he wonders and he hesitates. Can you see something a bit similar in the Jesus story, though I don't want to stress it too much, but Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, who balks, who wonders, who questions, even at the brink of the cross, but then finally surrenders to the Father's will. I think the taking of the pill by Neo is kind of a sacramental moment, when he says, okay, I'm willing to surrender to the invitation toward a higher world. There's an interesting character called Cypher, who is one of the liberated humans. Mind you, when the humans are liberated from the Matrix, they don't move into paradise immediately, just the contrary. They move into a very difficult, demanding world. The world of the Matrix is much more appealing and attractive in many ways, much more sensually pleasurable. Once they're freed from that, they go through a kind of a desert period. Well, look at in the Bible, when the Israelites escape from Egypt, they don't enter into the Promised Land. They have 40 years in the desert. That means your whole psyche and soul is adjusting to the new world, and it takes time. Well, during this process, people are often tempted to go back. Remember in the book of Exodus, the Israelites often say, well, at least we had enough food to eat in Egypt. They long for the flesh pots of Egypt, and Moses has to try to stop them from going back. Well, here now, this character, Cypher, says, I know I'm liberated. I know I'm living in a more real world now, but I've got terrible food to eat. I'm uncomfortable. I'm living in this cramped ship. It's a terrible life. He says to the agents of the Matrix, take me back. Take me back. Make me a movie star. Make me a rock star. Let me just have a filet mignon to eat. I know it's all an illusion, but at least it's pleasurable. Well, that's very central now to the spiritual life. We break away from the fallen world. We break away from the false world. And the new world is not quite there yet. So we have to pass through this period. Cypher is therefore kind of a Judas figure. He's willing to cooperate with the powers of darkness. He's willing to go back. And he, of course, tries to undermine or betray Neo. I think maybe a further implication of the Matrix is the whole idea of mission. Well, on the biblical reading, every one of us who participate in Christ are offered a mission. And the mission's always the same. The mission is to Christify the world, is to bring the power of Jesus Christ to the world. Well, that means to liberate. We're all given a mission to liberate the world from its fallen consciousness, from its fallen will, from the effects of sin. Will we do it? I don't know. There's the drama of salvation. Do you have the courage and do you have the imagination to accept this mission? I think that's a very important implication now for the ordinary believer. The first word out of the mouth of Jesus in Mark's gospel is metanoiete in the Greek. It means go beyond the mind you have, because the two Greek words are meta and nous, beyond the mind. Well, see, the implication is there's something wrong with our minds, our way of seeing, our attitude, our perspective. So the first thing Jesus says is you need to go beyond the mind you have and get a new mind in you. St. Paul says, may the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Well, see, that means the fallenness of our perceptive capacities. And therefore, the false world produced by the fallen mind has to be overcome. And that's a lot of what conversion language means. The Matrix is a story of conversion, of going beyond a false mind and moving into the new mind. But that requires a Savior. Neo, therefore, is the Christ figure that opens up this transformed mind.
Welcome back to the Word on Fire show. I'm Brandon Vaught, the host, and I'm joined here on Christmas Eve with Bishop Robert Barron. Bishop Barron, welcome.
Brandon, always a great joy to be with you, and happy Christmas.
You too. Now, we're recording this a couple weeks before Christmas Eve. This episode's going live on Christmas Eve, and at the time that we're recording this, you're about, I think, a week or two away from two really exciting interviews, which I guess will have already been published by the time this show goes live. But one of them is with Ben Shapiro. Tell us who he is and why you're excited to talk with him.
Ben Shapiro is a very sharp, very bright, kind of political, cultural commentator. He's been around for a little while now. Very vocal on a lot of the most controversial political issues of the time. A sharp, I'd say, conservatively minded person coming out of a fundamentally, I think, classical biblical view of things, So someone I've watched for a long time. I've not met him. So looking forward to that.
And Ben is also a pretty devout Jew. You see him in many of his interviews wearing a yarmulke, but he's brought on his program many Christians. Dr. Edward Fazer did a long interview with him. You're going to be on his Sunday special interview series, which is like a long form, I think hour-long interview. So we're very excited about that. The second one is you're going to be returning to talk with Dave Rubin. That was a big hit the first time you went on that show. It, I think, brought you to a whole new audience of especially young, secularized internet viewers. The twist for this one, though, is that it's going to be you, Dave Rubin, and then Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi Wolpe was named the most influential rabbi in America by Newsweek magazine and one of the 50 most influential Jewish leaders in the world. I'm excited to see what happens, although I feel like it's kind of a bad joke in waiting that an atheist, a bishop, and a Jewish rabbi walk into a YouTube set.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the fun of it, though, isn't it? I like that about Dave Rubin's show. Dave represents, as you say, kind of a secular, maybe humanistic perspective. The rabbi, again, I've not met him, but I'm presuming coming out of a fundamentally biblical view, but not a Christian one. So I'm very interested in that dialogue. That's, as you know, Brandon, I especially like the sort of what we call odd extra, going to the outside, going outside the boundaries of the church. That's where my kind of missionary evangelical spirit takes me. So that's why I'm looking forward, especially to that interview.
Well, then in the next episode, we'll do a recap and we'll talk more about how those two interviews went. But let's turn to the topic of today's episode. Again, this is going live on Christmas Eve, so we thought we'd devote the whole episode to that fundamental theological topic of the incarnation. And in the last episode, we discussed the importance of clarifying our terms, so maybe we'll start with that. What do we mean when we say incarnation, the incarnation of Jesus?
Think of it as the enfleshment. So God becoming one of us, God entering into our human condition, entering into our flesh. And that's why the word incarnation, there's something very gritty and earthy and realistic about it, which I like. It's not an abstraction, and it's not simply spiritual talk. That God, the creator of all things, becomes a creature out of love. Now, as we go through the conversation, we'll try to clarify, what those terms do and don't mean. But it's the enfleshment of God is the key to Christianity. Brandon, so many people, I think, succumb to this, I'd call it neo-Kantian interpretation, that religion gets down to ethics. It's, trying to make us good people. So what's the essence of Christianity? Being, as Flannery O'Connor put it, a person with a heart of gold, Well, that's derivative. I hope people do have hearts of gold. I hope they do become good and upright people. But the heart of the matter is not that. It's not ethics. The heart of the matter is this strange claim that God became one of us. Everything else is a footnote in Christianity. Everything else is related to that. It's like the center of the rose window. And I think we've marginalized the doctrine of the incarnation in favor of much more accessible things like ethics. And that's a bit of the Christmas revolution that we should keep preaching every year.
You admit it's not as accessible because it's admittedly a weird idea that God would take on human flesh. Here's a question I often hear from online and from my friends. Was the incarnation necessary? Did God have to do that? And was it necessary for him to reconcile himself with us that he needed to take on human form?
Can I give Thomas Aquinas' famous answer to that? Because Thomas said there are two types of necessity. There's a strict necessity. And in that sense, no, it was not strictly necessary that God become one of us, because God, in his infinite power, could have, saved us some other way. But then Thomas talks about a more kind of a looser sense of necessity. Is it necessary, in his example, to take a horse if you're traveling from Paris to Rome? And yeah, in that sense that it's by far the most convenient, or it's the best way to travel. By that second kind of necessity, he said it was necessary because there was no more beautiful, compelling, powerful way for God to save us than by becoming one of us. So that's the answer to the question about necessity. And I'd say this, Brandon, the great patristic adage that Aquinas certainly accepts, Deus fit homo, ut homo fieret Deus. That's Latin for God became man, that man might become God. See, again, don't misunderstand that as like we're turning into God. What it means is God enters into our humanity so as to lift our humanity up. He divinizes our flesh so that our flesh, our lives, might become participants in the divine life. See, that's the saving meaning of the incarnation. God becomes one of us. And there's that language of incarnation. God becomes a human. Now, please, don't misunderstand that as God turns into a human being. You know what I'm saying? As though he stops being God and now he turns into another. No, he doesn't turn into a creature. Rather, God takes to himself a creaturely nature, a human nature, so as to use it as his iconic vehicle, if I can put it that way. God speaks himself now, speaks and acts through the icon of the humanity of Jesus. See? And in doing that, in taking our flesh to himself, he lifts up, transfigures, and divinizes our flesh. Deus fit homo ut homo fieret Deus. God becomes man that man might become God. That's the salvific import of the incarnation.
The early church wrestled a lot with this issue of who is Jesus, what is his nature, the incarnation. Yeah. I'm thinking especially of the Council of Nicaea in the early 4th century. But then right after that, we get this bombshell, groundbreaking text from St. Athanasius titled On the Incarnation. I know for a lot of people who are maybe book savvy or theologically minded, when they hear incarnation, that's sort of the foundational book that they think of. Why is St. Athanasius' text so important?
He's such an important figure, isn't he, Athanasius? And you're quite right in saying he was active at the Council of Nicaea. He was a deacon under his bishop at the time. So he was there kind of as an assistant to his bishop. Then shortly after Nicaea, the bishop died and Athanasius became the bishop of Alexandria. But it's a wonderful thing because as a young guy, he got it, his life project was injected into him, see, at the Council of Nicaea, is he realized battling Arianism and affirming the divinity of Jesus is the falling and rising point of Christianity. He realized this is the Battle of Gettysburg, if I can use a Civil War analogy. This is the turning point in the struggle. And so Athanasius spends the rest of his long life enduring exile, threats to his life, all kinds of things, defending the orthodoxy of Nicaea. And he writes this great text you're referencing in the midst of all that, trying to lay out his view. here's something I love about that text. There's a lot in it that's great, but here's I think the main idea is, if Jesus is not God, then we're not saved. See, because we can't save ourselves. You and I are both in the same mess. We're both in this dysfunctional family of sinful humanity, right? It's like someone who's caught up in an addiction can't lift himself out of it. Therefore, we need a higher power to break into our dysfunction and fix it, see? Now, by the same token, if Jesus is not truly human, then we're not saved. You see what I mean? Is he puts the stress now on different words. He's not divine, we're not saved. He's not human, we're not saved. Because in his humanity, he enters, as it were, into the inner workings of our humanity and remakes it from the inside. Isn't it, in fact, our friend C.S. Lewis has that image of the broken, machine, or the broken item, and it can't fix itself. Like a broken toaster can't fix itself. But the one that can, par excellence, is the one who made the toaster, right? The one that knows it from the inside, and who gets his hands dirty going inside the works of the toaster so as to remake it. Now, it's a homely kind of analogy, but it's a good one for the incarnation. We're like broken toasters. We sinners. We're stuck in our sin. We can't save ourselves. And line up broken toasters all the way to the end of the world, they're not going to fix the broken toaster. Right? They're in the same mess. Someone has got to come from the outside of that world and enter into the works of the toaster so as to remake it. Now, line up philosophers and social activists and politicians and poets to the end of the world. They can't solve our problem because they're in the same mess we are, right? We're all in the same boat. We're all seasick, as your friend Chesterton said. They can't solve the problem. Line them up till the cows come home. Bring Aristotle and Plato and Kant and the greatest figures, Einstein. They can't solve the problem. Only God can solve the problem. Now, he also can't do it, at least optimally, to keep Thomas Aquinas in mind, by staying at an infinite reserve up in heaven and saying, "Oh, I pronounce you forgiven." Well, okay, but I'm still broken down here. I know you pronounce me forgiven, which is great, but I'm still broken down here. Rather, he comes down into the messiness of our humanity so as to rework it from the inside. Now think of Paul. Though he was in the form of God. So there's Paul affirming the divinity of Jesus. Now that's in Philippians. And that's Paul probably adapting a hymn that predated that letter. We're really early Christianity. Don't listen to Bart Ehrman and those bozos who say that it's all a later development. That's nonsense. From the earliest texts, Christians are affirming the divinity of Jesus. Though he was in the form of God, what now? He did not deem equality with God a thing to be grasped, but rather emptied himself, took the form of a slave, being born in the likeness of men. He was known to be of human estate, and thus it was that he humbled himself, obediently accepting even death on a cross. Now, what is that? That's the incarnational logic. God becomes man, entering into our dysfunction so as to remake it from the inside. That's the logic that Athanasius grasped. And though he was chased around the world for it, he was not a popular figure. Now he's the great Saint Athanasius, but at the time he was a real controversial figure. A lot of bishops had become Arians, and they were chasing that guy into exile. They wanted to kill him at several points. But he grasped the logic of Christianity and defended it to his dying breath. And it's cool, Brandon. I think of Athanasius all the time because every Sunday we get up as Catholics and we recite the creed, don't we? And at the heart of that first part of the creed is a reminder of the great battle that Athanasius fought. God from God, light from light, true God from true God. begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made. That's the fight that Athanasius had with Arius. And we rehearse his victory every single Sunday, because without that victory, no Christianity.
Help us understand the counter argument, because I think many people who know Athanasius know how much in the minority he was. There's that famous phrase, Athanasius against the world. It seemed like he was the only one standing for the view that you just described.
Yeah.
What did the Arians think about the incarnation or about Jesus's nature?
Well, Arius, who was a clever guy, all the great heresiarchs are clever. If they weren't, they wouldn't have founded these enduring perspectives. And, some very fine minds were beguiled by Arianism. So I don't want to dismiss it as a silly thing that, we got over. Arius was operating, I would say, out of a fundamentally mythological perspective, which was very common in that part of the world at that time. Who was Jesus? Well, he was a bit like Hercules or like Achilles. What I mean is he was kind of quasi-divine and quasi-human. So for Arius, what becomes incarnate is not God from God, but rather the Logos, which he saw as the highest of creatures, the first of God's creatures, becomes not fully human, but enters into a sort of human shell. So that now you've got the Logos in the flesh, and the two of them together form a kind of hybrid, semi-divine, semi-human. Does that make sense? Now, we might say, well, what a bizarre perspective, but you're in the ancient world, and you've heard these stories of gods mixing with humans and producing hybrids. Yeah, okay, I get it. He's like Hercules. Yeah, good. He's like a great mythological hero. Is it easier to believe? Yeah, in a way, because now you don't have God himself getting his hands so dirty. It's God himself. No, he remains at a remove, from all that messiness. But his first creature, the Logos, kind of gets down into. But also, it's not like a real human being that God takes on. It's a sort of simulacrum or quasi-humanity he takes on. See, all that at the time was easier to believe. It was more of a mythological framework. Athanasius and Council of Nicaea are proposing something really new. Now, go a couple generations later, the Council of Chalcedon, right? What do you find there but a further articulation of the coming together of what they call two natures in one person, divine and human. But mind you, without mixing, mingling, or confusion. So in their integrity, their fullness, humanity and divinity come together. That was a fuller explication of what Nicaea and Athanasius saw.
One of the classical attributes of God is his immutability, meaning he doesn't change. He was, he is, he will be forever as he is. How do we square that with the incarnation, with all of this active language we're using about like the second person of the Trinity becoming a man and all that?
Yeah, and it's a classic dilemma. Think of my becoming an uncle. So when my sister had her first child, my nephew, I became an uncle. Did I change? No, not in myself, but a new relation was now ascribable to me. See? I didn't sort of actively change into something else, but a new relation was now ascribable to me. That would be an analogy now with the incarnation. Not that, again, God is turning into something else, or God is now changing into some new form. Rather, a new relation to God has begun to obtain, which didn't previously obtain. But that wouldn't affect the very essence of God's nature, which remains unchangeable. See, in fact, if you really want to press the thing, which gets into kind of cool theological territory, it's precisely the immutability of God that makes the incarnation really possible. It's precisely the unconditioned quality of God that enables God to be non-competitively in relationship to the world. Read Robert Sokolowski for all the details on that one.
How about this question? How does the incarnation affect matter or the material world? We've talked about how it affects specifically our humanity and our salvation, but what did Jesus becoming man have to do with the rest of the created world?
Gosh, read St. Paul, read Ephesians, read Colossians especially, read Romans. What's cool, Brandon, is we've been very conditioned as Westerners by Augustine and Aquinas and many others. And there's a tendency in the West to read the thing very anthropologically. So we tend to see salvation primarily in terms of how it affects us. And nothing wrong with that. It does indeed affect us profoundly. Go to the eastern side of the equation, though. And keep in mind, St. Paul was operating mostly in the East, wasn't he? I mean, he dies in Rome, but that's where he ended up. Most of his life, he was in the eastern side of the empire. Well, there's a form of Christianity that develops in the East that puts a far greater stress on the cosmological dimension. Christ as the sort of the new Adam who represents the renewal of all of creation. And hear it in Paul, don't you? All creation groans inwardly. So it's not just, human beings get out of the fix of sin. In a way, all of matter now finds its proper orientation in this great figure. So the incarnation ultimately has to do with the divinizing of all of the material creation. Now, mutatis mutandis, don't push that in some kind of pantheist direction. What it means is all of material creation being lifted up to a participation in God's nature, finding its proper finality in God. So I think all that cosmic thing is very strong in the incarnation.
What would you say in your experience is the most common misunderstanding about the incarnation, and what do we get wrong about it?
Yeah, what I've said a couple times, and I used to see it when I would teach this at the seminary, because even these kids coming to the seminary, who wanted to be priests and really love their Christianity, but they had this misunderstanding that it means God turns into a creature. And to be fair to them, we use the language of becoming. God becomes man. God becomes a creature. Well, in our normal experience, something becomes something else. It stops being this and becomes that. And we don't mean that. We mean God takes to himself a human nature to use for his iconic purposes. So I'm using Paul's language there, that Jesus, now think here of the humanity of Jesus, is the icon of the invisible God. God remains invisible in his unconditioned nature. God's not a visible conditioned thing. But God uses a visible conditioned thing, namely Jesus' humanity, to be his iconic representative. So we say that the humanity of Jesus now is the visible form of the invisible God. That's incarnational language, That's getting it right. Don't fall into the sort of mythological trap of God turning into something that he's not. He's no longer God. Now he's a creature. No. Precisely as God, he becomes a creature.
Let's close with this, Bishop. In the introduction to your book titled Catholicism, A Journey to the Heart of the Faith, which is kind of a companion to your Catholicism series, you say that what sets the Catholic faith apart from every other religion and every other Christian tradition is that Catholics are convinced that the incarnation extends throughout space and time. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the church, isn't it? Which is not an organization, but an organism, not a club, but a living body. Just as the second person of the Trinity took to himself a human nature 2,000 years ago, he takes to himself in an analogous way another body, which is called the body of the church. That means all of those who are grafted onto Christ through baptism across space and time, and by extension, the sacraments and sacramentals and art and architecture and all of the embodiedness of the church is now in space and time the iconic representation of the second person of the Trinity. So the fathers talk a lot about that, the extension of the incarnation across space and time in the mystical body. Isn't it very interesting, Brandon, that in the creed that I referenced already, we believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and the church. I believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church, right? You say, well, how peculiar. I mean, of course you believe in the three persons of God, But why would you believe in a human institution? Well, that's the point. I wouldn't believe in a human institution. I'm skeptical of human institutions. But I believe in the church, see, which means I'm putting my faith in the divine element within the life of the church. God knoweth. There's a human dimension to the church, and it's like all human things, flawed. The church is full of nothing but sinners, right? Last time I checked. But I'm not believing in that dimension. I'm believing in the humanity of it, in the divinity of the church, see, which participates in the second person of the Trinity. So that's a very interesting and I think distinctively Catholic take on the church.
That sound means it is time for our question from our listeners. If you have a question, just visit askbishopbarron.com. It can be on any theological, philosophical, moral topic. We'd love to hear from you. So visit askbishopbarron.com and ask away. Today we have a question from Clark asking about Buddha's famous maxim. So here's Clark's question.
Hi, Bishop Barron. My name is Clark from Smallville. My question is, what do you think of Buddha's famous maxim, life is suffering? Thank you.
First of all, am I talking to Superman? Clark from Smallville, huh? That's interesting. I'd say this, the Buddha is right about that. Life is suffering. Now, he doesn't mean every moment is nothing but, horror. Every moment is terrible. No. What he means, I think, is that everything in this life will conduce ultimately to dissolution and to pain and disappointment. We all die. As I record these words, my sister's beloved dog just died. And, my niece and nephew who are now in their late teens, but they got that dog when they were little kids. And he was a wonderful dog. He really was a golden retriever, nothing but joy and fun, and everyone loved him. And he just died, which has led to extraordinary suffering, in their family. Well, let's face it, that's life. Everything eventually fades away. You and I, Brandon, will fade away. This program will fade away. Everyone listening to it will fade away. The most beautiful sunset, it lasts for a short time, then it's gone. That delicious meal that we had, it's gone. It's over. I'm hungry again. The Buddha is putting his finger, as almost all the great religious figures do, on this contingent, evanescent, deeply unsatisfying quality of life. Life is suffering. True. I think it's true in all the great religious traditions. Now, what's different, many things, but one thing about Buddhism and Christianity, the Buddhist answer is, well, then put out desire, that suffering is born of desire, right? So nirvana means the snuffing out of a candle. The snuffing out of the candle of egotistic desire will overcome the problem of suffering. The Christian answer is the incarnation, right? That God himself enters into all that frightens us and all that bedevils us and all that produces suffering. God takes on suffering and thereby divinizes it, shows a path through it toward fullness of life. Now, that'd be, I think, a really cool conference to have with serious Buddhist scholars, serious Christian scholars. How do you handle the problem of suffering? Because in many ways, see, all the religions acknowledge it in one form or another. Life is suffering. They all acknowledge that. But what's the answer? The Christian answer is precisely what we're celebrating at Christmas, the incarnation.
Well, we want to wish you a Merry Christmas on behalf of Bishop Barron and all of Word on Fire, a happy solemnity of the Nativity of our Lord Jesus Christ. Also, I want to ask you, as we near the end of this year, if you could please make a donation to Word on Fire to help us continue our work in 2019. You can go to wordonfireshow.com/giving. You'll see a list of all the things we've done this past year thanks to your help, and you can help us continue that as we move into the new year. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week on the Word on Fire show.
Well, I just recently saw the movie Bird Box, which began streaming on Netflix around Christmas time, and it's a movie that's had quite a big cultural resonance. Stars Sandra Bullock and John Malkovich and others. I think, almost despite itself, it sheds quite a bit of light on our rather parlous spiritual condition today. Bullock's character is called Mallory, and we meet her in the beginning as a very gifted painter, but her paintings reveal what's true of her personality, namely that she has a very hard time connecting with people. She's pregnant as the movie begins, but it's very clear, first of all, that we don't even know who the father is. She's not living with him. She seems totally indifferent to him. More to it, she seems resolved to put the baby up for adoption once it's born. So she's, a gifted person, but a kind of disconnected person. So she goes to the hospital for a routine checkup, and as she's leaving, I think it's fair to say, all hell breaks loose. So into the town, inexplicably, have come these extremely malign spiritual forces, for want of a better term. And when people see them or are made to see them, they immediately and ferociously are compelled to commit suicide. So as Mallory leaves the hospital, she sees this havoc in her city as people are walking in front of moving buses. They're walking into flames. They're stabbing and shooting themselves to death everywhere. Frantically, she makes her way into a house where there are few survivors. It appears that the specters can't operate indoors. And then this little group huddles together. The film then unfolds as the story of their kind of desperate attempts to survive, because they have to go out to get supplies and food, etc. I won't give you all the details, but in the course of the movie, everyone in that house is eventually exposed to these specters and they commit suicide. Everyone except for Mallory, the baby to whom she gives birth, so her child, and then there's another child born to a woman who was pregnant when she entered the house. That mother had died. So it's now Mallory and the two children. Well, they've heard through a kind of crackling, indistinct radio that there's this haven where people have found refuge, and it's down a river from where they are. And if she could just make her way down river, she could find this haven. So there's the kind of the second part of the movie is all about this desperate journey. And the three of them blindfolded, because they can't look around, they make their way down the river. And they eventually, after enduring all sorts of trials, they do find this place of refuge, which turns out to be, understandably, a school for the blind, so people that can't see these specters. And in this place, it's very kind of bucolic and beautiful, and there's a lot of human warmth, and nature is very much on display. And there, Mallory is finally able to sort of relax psychologically and spiritually and to find connection to the kids. Okay, so it's a story in many ways of, as the director said, it's a story of motherhood, how this woman discovers connection to her kids. It's a story, I might say, of how we find a certain comfort in the face of great danger, in each other and in the beauties of nature. Okay, fair enough. But here's what I found really interesting as I watched the movie, is not so much what's in it, but what's not in it. Namely, any reference to God. Now, I've commented before about this in all disaster movies today, or most of them, let's say. When people are threatened by, comets or by dinosaurs or by, aliens or whatever it is, hardly anyone in movies today ever prays, ever invokes God in the face of these terrible challenges. But I would say with this movie, with Bird Box, it was especially egregious. Now, why? Why? Because they're not dealing with aliens or dinosaurs or a comet from outer space. They're dealing with precisely malign spiritual forces. I think, for want of a better term, demons. Demons have invaded their territory, but nobody talks about God. Nobody makes reference to God or asks God for help. There's a scene toward the beginning I found very telling, and it's sort of tragicomic. One of the young men in the house, as they're casting about trying to understand what's going on, he utters this sort of farrago of wild theories born of mythology and ancient religion and various things to explain what's happening. they look at him with utter, kind of disbelief and confusion, and he says, "Yeah, I got it on the internet." And now what struck me was, it's really telling about our own time, because here's a major spiritual crisis has emerged. If you want, a spiritual warfare is going on. Does anyone have the ability to reach into the classical religious view in order to understand what's going on and to know what to do? No, all they've got is this weird amalgam of ideas and disconnected myths drawn from the internet. No wonder these people are lost. No wonder these people are in danger. Okay, I mentioned how it began streaming around Christmas time. And I couldn't help but make this connection to another very famous, maybe the most famous Christmas movie, namely It's a Wonderful Life. Now I know this is nerd alert right away, but as I watched that movie for probably the 48th time in my life this Christmas, what especially struck me was the famous scene when George Bailey is on the bridge, remember, and he's faced his worst fears, the sum total of them, is they've lost the money, and it means that his business is going to go under. It means he's going to lose his reputation. It means he might go to jail. He's going to lose his family, everything he loves. He's seen his worst fears. And on that bridge, he prays to God. Now, it takes him a while to figure out that his prayer has been answered, but indeed it was, because God sends the angel, Clarence, who eventually leads him on this journey, etc. Now, my point is simply this. One of the characters in Bird Box says that I think what these demons are, these specters, they make you see all of your worst fears. Well, if you're looking at all of your worst fears, and you have no sense of God, no connection to God, I think the natural response is what you see, is people say, I'm just going to end my life. But see, George Bailey did see his worst fears, but he had the metaphysical and religious framework to understand what to do. And so he prayed, and in that great act came salvation. Now, I think Bird Box is a good movie. I liked it. It's an engaging kind of taut, thriller. So I'm not bad-mouthing the movie. But I do think, if we look at the trajectory from George Bailey to Mallory and how people are dealing with real spiritual crisis, I think you're going to notice a certain devolution that's happened in our culture.